Matt Miguez has plenty on his mind, and he's ready to share it with the world. It's time to hear the Miguez Mindset.
Welcome into another edition of the Miguez Mindset here on ESPN 103.7 Lafayette and 104.1 Lake Charles. Matt Miguez here, back from vacation. Now it's football season. I mean, camp is very much underway for LSU, UL, and many other college football programs around the country. Today, we're going to talk about the Ragin Cajuns, plus get into some conference realignment with our guy, Cory Diaz. He covers the Cajuns for the Daily Advertiser. Cory, what's going on, my man? How are you?
Hey, what's up, buddy? Doing well. How are you?
Oh, doing absolutely fantastic. So the Cajuns are 4 camp practices in, and now is kind of the early part of seeing, okay, who's starting to separate themselves from the rest. Where is a position standing out? Where do they maybe still need some work? Through those 4 days, from what you've kind of seen, what are your thoughts on the Cajuns program so far?
Yeah, I think, coming in to preseason practice, defensive backfield, offensive backfield, really were probably the two, I'd say, units that maybe had the most questions, for lack of a better term. I think the DB situation is a little misleading in the sense that you got a lot of guys that actually played a lot last year, and even some guys that are, that played a couple of years ago that are just now really getting, a guy like Amir McDaniel, right? That's really getting his first shot at being a starter. But, UL obviously handles things differently, right? They you start, but, you may play a series or two, and then the guy behind you is coming in and playing a series or two. They play a lot of guys. So that's why Lamar Morgan, at Media Day last week mentioned that, he didn't feel as, I guess, apprehensive, say maybe some fans feel about the defensive backfield, right? Because 50% of the snaps that were played last year are back, and the same can be said for, linebacker, like Casey Osai, right? He didn't start last year, but he finished 5th on the team in tackles. Like, you don't do that. You don't have a statistic like that unless you're rolling in a lot of guys, you're rotating a lot of guys in there. Same thing along the defensive line too. So I think the defense is probably not going to be quite as good as it was last year, but I think the gap is going to be much smaller than a lot of people are assuming and anticipating. Now, offensively, look, you got to get the run game going. I don't think there's any question about it. Obviously, what helps, Michael Desimo and is going into his second year, obviously has a very much an offensive background, right? What helps him is that you've got 4 guys back along the offensive line that you didn't really have last year. You had so many guys coming back from whether it be injuries, just guys getting playing time for the first time in their collegiate careers last year to now, you got guys like Nathan Thomas and Landon Burton, those guys who have played a lot of football now, and they're entrenched in their roles. Really only one spot at right tackle that's, they're figuring some things out there, but that can only help the run game get going. And you're going to need that with some inexperience out wide. And that was kind of a position that we visited with Diaz earlier today at his first, media availability during preseason camp. He talked a lot about the wide receiver spot and guys like Rob Williams, Tavion Smith, who's a JUCO transfer, who was a Southern Miss signee right out of high school. He's come in and has done some good things. Yeah, there's still some questions, and look, they're just 4 practices in. Today will be the 5th practice this afternoon. They'll have a day off tomorrow and then get back at it on Wednesday. It just seems like from visiting with Dez and some of the staff last week, some players last week and this week, that the team kind of feels good. They feel better about where they are 4 practices in this preseason as opposed to last year.
Yeah, you look at the differences between this year's camp and last year's, and Coach Des earlier today talked about how that everybody feels more comfortable this year than they did this time last year. And obviously that comes with the fact that you now have a full season under your belt. And I think the other biggest thing, and Coach Des brought this up as well, every member of last season's coaching staff is back. Talk about how critical that can be for the continuity of the program to really not miss a beat and just keep on rolling.
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of the guesswork out, right? And I think one little part of this that really hasn't been discussed very much, Matt, is this, because you see it all the time in college football now. A coach, opens up a relationship with a player, when he's a sophomore in high school, right? And, you start the recruiting process early, and these coaches, they form these relationships with these players. And then, players get on campus, they may get 1 year under the guy that recruited them, and then they bolt for another job.
Right.
I think it's interesting that, these young guys, especially the true freshmen, they had guys that were recruiting them last year while they were high school players. They're getting to play for their coaches this year. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way. And so that's why I say I think it takes a lot of the guesswork out. And I think it does help logistically because players already kind of know what to expect.
For sure.
And I think the coaches know what to expect from their players too, because they had that time with them last year. Coaches kind of know what makes them tick, because each player is different, right? Some guys can be motivated, by, yelling and being challenged at in practice. There's some other guys that maybe aren't motivated that way. So with that extra year, at least that extra year of coaching those guys up, they already kind of know what makes them tick during practice, and what it's going to take to get the most competitiveness out of them on a day-to-day basis. And so I think it's huge. And obviously that's not something that you see very often when you get all 10 of your on-field assistants back, from the year before. It's kind of an anomaly now. And so, and so I'm really interested to see kind of how that's going to help the team, because, we're just very much still in talking season at this point. We'll start playing games here in 4 weeks' time. Then it'll be up to the players to go out there and deliver, under the bright lights. So, I think that player to coach relationship goes without saying will be much stronger this year as opposed to it was last year. Then it'll be about, delivering, whether it be Saturday nights or Thursday night or what have you.
Now, looking at the quarterback situation, Coach Des, I had the opportunity to sit down with him at Sunbelt Media Days, and he told me, going into last year, you hoped that you had one guy that could go win you games. He said, going into this year, we have 3 guys that we know can go win us football games. Now that Ben Wooldridge is healthy, I have a pretty good idea of where Michael Desmo is going to go in terms of who's going to be the starting quarterback. But I really want Cory Diaz's opinion on this. Who should be the starting quarterback for the Ragin' Cajuns?
I like Wooldridge. I do. I liked him. I always said this offseason that when you take the bodies of work of what they've done, Chandler Fields, Ben Wooldridge, Zion Chris, and maybe it's a little bit unfair to throw Zion into it because he, came in when Chandler got hurt in the Independence Bowl, and it was 12 degrees outside in Shreveport, Louisiana. And, maybe it's not fair to sort of evaluate how he played in a game like that, or how he performed, being the only scholarship quarterback available during the spring for them, because spring is its own animal, and it's very much a watered down product of the game of college football. So, but I always thought that, Ben, just how he performed last year, I thought he's the best option at quarterback for this group. Went on a road on a Wednesday night and helped his team win at Marshall, a very tough place to win football games. And he did it. I think that was his first start of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And you can correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but like doing things like that, the team looked completely out of sorts and dead in the water against Troy at home. And he, almost willed them to a come from behind win, against the Trojans. We ended up winning the West Division in the Sun Belt and went on to win the conference championship. He did some really, really, really good things. And maybe for Chandler, right, he didn't really get, kind of the sequence that Ben got, right? When Ben was out there, it was because Chandler was hurt. So he got, all these series consecutively when Chandler really didn't get that either. But I just still thought that from a decision-making standpoint, from an ability to identify what was breaking down and making a snap decision last year, and whether it be tucking and running or, getting out of the pocket and keeping his eyes downfield and delivering a ball. I thought Wooldridge was the best quarterback on roster heading into this season. And you have to credit him. Obviously he wanted to get back really bad. And just 9 months removed from tearing his ACL during practice, for him to be 100% healthy, ready to go, speaks volumes about obviously what he does for himself away from the football field. I think it's even away from the facility. Yep. He obviously does all the right things, and I think he's a guy. Yeah, obviously he's going to be a leader, but I think what he's done for this team, because I spent some time with a lot of his offensive teammates at Media Day last week, just talking to them about what kind of statement Ben had made amongst the team with how he went about his rehab and recovery process in order to afford himself an opportunity to be with them from day one at preseason practice this year. I mean, inspirational, right. Laser focused, one of the hardest workers on the team. Those are the things that I think are going to permeate and resonate through this team. And I think that's going to be something that's going to be different about this year's UL team versus the one last year.
Now, Cory, let's look at the big hot topic in college football right now, and that's conference realignment. A couple months ago, everybody freaked out when USC and UCLA announced that they were leaving the Pac-12 to go to the Big Ten. And now here comes Oregon and Washington and Arizona State going to the Big 12 with Colorado and Utah. The Pac-12 is just seemingly falling apart. Now, does the Pac-12 pull an American and, try to put the pieces back together? Or do the final 4 teams that are left in the Pac-12 go somewhere else and you go to the Power 4?
Really good question. I feel like, of course, this is just a 1,000-mile, third-party objective viewpoint of the situation, because I hadn't personally been really keyed in on it. But I mean, I would think that the Pac-12, Pac-10, Pac-4, what the number is now, they probably really hoped when all this conversation got started again, over a year ago, is that they'd hang on to the Los Angeles market. Yep. Because if they were somehow able to do that, then, and that's form of like keeping USC at home or UCLA, not necessarily both of them, just one of them. Right. If you could just keep them in conference, you probably salvage your chances of existence, because that's one of the biggest TV markets in the entire country. Well, now both Los Angeles schools are gone. And now you've lost a lot of your other bigger brands to the Big Ten as well. I really have a hard time seeing how they survive. And part of this, I feel like, goes back several years ago. I can remember the conversation about the quote unquote East Coast bias as it pertains to Heisman Trophy candidates, and right. People complaining about voters for that individual trophy in Richmond, Virginia, aren't staying up late enough to watch Arizona State play Washington or whatever at midnight. Right. And maybe there was some truth to that. So, and there's obviously nothing that the Pac-12 could do to help that other than have teams play games at 8:00 in the morning, which I don't think any coach and team would ever agree to doing. So I think maybe because of that, man, like I think it's even harder to sell the league now to these individual television networks, and because I mean, what is that viewership number? Right. I mean, it's probably not even in the same ballpark, for a Saturday night ESPN SEC game,
Right.
or a Saturday night ACC game for that matter, which I think, when you think about Big 12, SEC, Big 10, ACC, I think the ACC numbers are the lowest of the four of those, I would say. I don't know how they survive. And if they do it, then obviously you got to credit the commissioner and the powers that be there for somehow keeping that thing together. But what about a Stanford who, I cover a lot of women's basketball. Like, they're one of the best women's basketball programs in the entire country. Like, I can't imagine Tara Vanderbilt coaching a game, with Stanford against like San Diego, and it being a conference game like that.
Right.
To me, that just doesn't. Teams like Stanford and maybe even Cal too, right? Like, they would benefit more from just being an independent. I don't know. I think at this point, I think a lot of these schools probably have they should have their own personal agendas, and they should just have their priority list and figure out what's best for them. Because obviously their conference mates don't really care anymore. I mean, Washington State, Washington, the Apple Cup, what's going to happen to it? I mean, we've already seen the death of Bedlam, I mean,
Yep.
TV money rules it right now, and rivalries and geography, all of these things that when I was watching Jefferson Pilots, SEC games way on back in the day, with Dave Neal calling the games, like, college football is just nowhere near the same. And it's a completely different product, and it's a completely different sport, really. And, now it's just about following the money.
Last question I've got for you, Cory. With this conference realignment, you've seen the Power Five become even more top heavy than it already is. The Big 12 pulled a lot of teams from the American. And so I think that there's even a bigger divide now between the Power Five and the G5. I've seen some people throw out the idea, and it's been thrown out before, of a G5 national championship, having a separate national championship from the playoff. A, do you agree with that should be a thing? And B, how does the NCAA go about doing that?
Yeah, that's a good question too. It's weird because I'm kind of in favor of it, but I just don't know just strictly from a monetary standpoint how that would work, because the G5 needs the P5.
Right.
There's no other way around it. I'm sorry, but these money games, I mean, they are crucial. Sure. They're crucial for an Arkansas State's athletic budget. They just are. And so you can't completely separate the two quote unquote divisions. You just can't do it. But at the same time, this will be the last year, the 2023 college football season will be the last year of a 14 playoff. In 2024, we'll be going to 12 teams. And this is something that, fans of say, USC or, Washington or, some Big 12 schools have clamored for a long time. Well, now you've got what you wanted. And now the TV networks have basically, I would say, almost completely screwed you out of, say, an Appalachian State getting into a 12-team playoff. Because now what's going to happen is that there's too many teams in the SEC, there's too many teams in the Big 10 for them all to play each other. So now you're going to have multiple undefeated teams in a league. They're not like There's not going to be a 12-0. I'm sorry, but there's not going to be a 12-0 Oklahoma that didn't even play for, like, say, an SEC championship game. They're going to get in. They're going to get in over, a 10-2, Coastal Carolina. They just are. And so this 12-team playoff, while in theory it sounded great, but I mean, what's stopping, 4 SEC teams, 4 Big 10 teams, 2 ACC teams, and 3 Big 12 teams from getting in? It's hard to envision a scenario where that doesn't happen, because, especially if you get into a situation where, you've got 2 undefeated teams in the SEC and a 1-loss team, all 3 of those teams are just getting in. They just are, and so now you go from what you thought was maybe a 4-spot field of potentially getting in as a G5 school, like a Tulane, right? Like, what's the chances of them getting in if they like now? We've talked about it for a long time. Like, it's important for a G5 school to go undefeated. Like, you have to be 13-0 to even give yourself a shot. And like, weirdly enough, now even with a larger playoff field, it's even more important for say a Tulane to go 13-0 just to even give themselves a chance to
Certainly
be a 12 seed, So I think it would obviously drum up some excitement to have a group of 5 national championship game. But there's no way to completely separate the divisions. And so I would love to kind of get a peek behind the curtain there of how logistically they would piece that together. Because again, even with 12 teams making a playoff, to me, I think the G5 stands next to zero chance of getting a team in. And so there's still no chance of them playing for a national championship.
Cory Diaz of the Daily Advertiser joining us here on the Miguez Mindset. Cory, appreciate your time as always. Football season's 4 weeks away, brother. Let's do it again.
Sounds good, brother. Appreciate you.
And there he goes. Cory Diaz of the Daily Advertiser joining us here on the Miguez Mindset. That's going to do it for today's episode. We'll be back on Wednesday talking about the Houston Astros post-trade deadline. Justin Verlander back in the fold. What does that mean for the Astros pitching staff as they make a push for October? Don't forget to follow us on all of our social medias at ESPN Southwest Louisiana and ESPN_SWLA. We'll be back on Wednesday right here on ESPN 103.7 Lafayette and 104.1 Lake Charles.